3A entities, and it's very important that we account as to how did we use the allocation that we have given to us, the allocation given to us vis-a-vis the actual spending that we have done. So that slide just depicts that. In terms of the allocations, I think we had an allocation of 95. We just wanted to indicate out of the 95, the spending was 116 million, and the reason for that 116 million is because the spending was augmented by the projects that were ring-fenced and that were approved in terms of the surpluses, in terms of the commitments. Hence, you see the spending being 116 as compared to the 95. So that variance is explained by the issues of the commitment that were approved through Treasury. And also in terms of the deficit, is nothing to be alarmed about. This is because in the previous years, NEMISA made surpluses because of the funds that were rolled over. So in terms of the financial performance, there is nothing that one can be worried about. In terms of the keynotes, in terms of the property, plant and equipment, there was a 100% increase in the assets in the form that NEMISA is expanding its delivery model of the training so that we don't rely on one site. Traditionally, we used to have mainly training coming from what we call universities, as the CEO has alluded, but now we've expanded even in terms of internal capacity, in terms of our own in-house. As such, we have now computer labs so that training can also be done at the NEMISA site internally, and also in terms of our normal radio and TV trainings. In terms of that, we did revamp our studio so that we can also massify those training. That's why in terms of the property, plant and equipment, there was that 100% increase, which amount around about 6.6 million that we spent. In terms of the commitments, you recall that in terms of the commitments, NEMISA in the previous year had around about 33 million commitments that were committed, and this year we've went on a drive to ensure that those commitments are used in terms of the project that were approved for, and in such, that's why we ended up ensuring that around about 18 million of that is spent in the current year to ensure that we spend those. Hence the issue of the commitment that have really drastically gone down. Even in terms of the remaining one, those projects that are remaining in terms of the commitment that are running, as alluded by the CEO, in terms of the Yaruna project as being one of the projects. If I can just move on to the issues of the irregular expenditure. In the current year, the irregular expenditure was 425,000. I must also just give the committee a bit of a background that you remember that in terms of the 17-18 financially, I think NEMISA had an issues with the issues of irregular tenders, quotations, and issue of contract management. In 18-19, we resolved the issues of the tenders. We didn't have any irregular tenders. We were left with the issues of the RFQ and contract management. In the current year, in terms of the audit report, we did manage to resolve those issues. The current year irregular expenditures of 425, though it was not material, we are saying as NEMISA, the target is to ensure that in the following year, this becomes zero. But this is a huge achievement on our side, although we still target that we ensure that we have zero irregular expenditure. In terms of the prior year identified in the current year, I must just explain, these are the contracts that were signed back in 2017. The unfortunate part that is that the irregular expenditures will live with us until the contract is finally end, which will be in 30 May 2022. So just to indicate that we will do an investigation on the 425 and consequence management will be taken. In terms of the fruitless and wasteful, again, in the previous years, you will recall that NEMISA again had a lot of challenges in terms of the fruitless and wasteful expenditure. I think during the current year, we've reduced that drastically, only 10,482, which again, we are saying that this will also ensure that investigation are done, proper consequence management are taken. Also, just to indicate, Chair, that to ensure that these issues of irregular expenditure do not recur, because part of them were related to the issue of capacity. As we did not have the procurement manager, we appointed the procurement managers with effect from August 2020, which we believe it will go a long way so that we end up with our own target of ensuring that we have zero irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. If I can be able to move to the key AGSA audit matters, these are the audit matters that I would say if one has to remove them, ideally NEMISA should be able to achieve a clean audit. It was just an issue that the CEO has already touched on with the issue of the validity of the reported performance information, which we are saying that the information that we obtained was not aligned to the TDI as such. It couldn't be admissible. Measures already been put in place. I think the CEO has already touched on that. The issue of the disclosure of the lease commitment, this was the issue with the result of the issue of the due to misinterpretation of the automatic lease extension, the lease agreement leading to the incomplete disclosure of the commitment. This has already been addressed, and Chair, just to go moving forward is that we have implemented measures to ensure that we've got panel of attorneys, all SLA that we are signing. We need to ensure that we vet them, because the root cause with regards to this was that the lease agreement, the manner it was done, it was not done in such a way that it's ambiguous, and then it was open to many interpretation. But what we have done is that all SLA, particularly those with big amounts, needs to be vetted and ensure that the clauses are not ambiguous, so that they don't have many interpretations with regards to that. If I can move over to the issue of governance, I think the chairperson of the board will be able to take us through that, chairperson.
Thank you, CFO. Chairperson, in terms of governance, NEMISA board is committed to ensuring good governance is practiced, and also to ensure that the integrity of the institution is upheld in maintaining the shareholder confidence. If we can go to the next slide, please, CFO. CFO, thank you. The current board, which I'm currently chairing, came into effect from the 1st of October 2019. And I have other colleagues with me on the board. And the previous board's term ended end of September 2019. There was a gap period between the 30th of September 2019 to the 1st of 1 month. But during that month, there were no board decisions that were required. Therefore, there was non-compliance in terms of governance. In terms of how the board is constituted, we've got over and above the board, we've got 4 subcommittees of the board to ensure that board members are participating at all levels of business and engaging to ensure that we uphold the mandate of the shareholder. We've got the Audit and Risk Committee, which is being led by Mr. Melvin Lubega. We've got the HRRNC Committee, led by Ms. Nomonde Tlataneni. We also have the Program and Academic Committee, which is headed by Prof. Chris Adendorf. We've got the Social and Ethics and Transformation Committee, which is also headed by Mr. Lionel Adendorf with 1F. In terms of board meeting attendance, we ensure that we've got regular board meetings on a quarterly basis. We also have quite a new mandate of NEMISA. We're ensuring that the board is providing the strategic direction to the organization to adopt and implement the new mandates of the 4IR massification agenda for the country. Therefore, we are actively hands-on, ensuring that the institution is on board with regards to the mandates of the organization. Thank you, Chair.
We now move to the ICASA. Over to you, ICASA. ICASA.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairperson and honorable members. I hope you can hear me, Honorable Chairman Eli. So I
We can hear you well, and we can see you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Indeed, we will be brief. We do understand that the presentation has been it was circulated well in advance. So I think the first slides just deal to the question of why ICASA exists and why we do the things we do. Of course, we are established pursuant to Section 192 of the Constitution of the Republic to regulate the broadcasting, the telecommunications and postal sectors in the public interest. Now we are here to present on our annual report, annual performance of the financial year 2019-20. And I think we can just move on to slide 9 in the interest of time, because it's the slide that deals with the performance summary. In the year under review, we had 38 targets, and 33 targets were achieved, and 5 of those were unfortunately not achieved. And we will deal with the issue of what led to the non-achievement a bit comprehensively. So this means we have achieved 86.8% of our targets, and we couldn't meet 13.2%, which I said we will deal with. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Now, on the areas of non-achievement, it varies on a number of issues, part of which is the issue around the implementation of the organizational structure, the review of the broadcasting of national sporting event regulations, the findings document on mass carry, and as well as the subscription broadcasting services market inquiry. We can move to slide 16. Now, these were the direct contributing factors for areas of non-achievement. Public hearings, some of the public hearings were scheduled for the month of March, and it is not an anomaly. There are certain targets based on how we approach our regulatory endeavors that we would plan that in the last week of March, we would either hold public hearings if the annual target for a particular project is just, from an APP point of view, if the annual target is just to hold public hearings. Unfortunately, on or about the 18th of March, the nation was addressed by the president, and they started announcing certain restrictions in terms of, number of people congregating at a particular point. So I think it's important to understand it in context that we couldn't, in the remaining 2 weeks of March, proceed with some of the public hearings which we had hoped to do, simply because even though lockdown started on the 27th of March, but at least restrictions around congregating in large numbers came into effect on or about the 18th of March. There was another issue of extensions being granted. Now, as the authority, we do run regulatory projects, most of which are aligned to the APP. However, from a practical point of view, we sometimes find ourselves in a difficult position where interested stakeholders and role players request for extensions. Now, we cannot legally just dismiss a request for an extension on the basis that it affects our annual performance plan. I think it's something that we really need to appreciate. In some instances, we do grant extensions. In some, we reject those extensions. But in an event where it happened to affect our APP, it simply means we couldn't, on a balance of probabilities, taking into account the risk of litigations and so forth, we couldn't then avoid giving that particular extension. And of course, there was an issue of, the mandated consultations period, which are stipulated in law. that we couldn't, of course, bypass in any way. Slide 18. Now, from a governance point of view, these were the members of council or the constitution of council in the year under review. And of course, we then, dedicate our efforts to our late colleague, the late Councillor Mokhele, who was buried over a month ago. And we really think this closes, the chapter of the work we have done with her, even though her legacy will go on. Now that was the composition of council. Of course, we do have new members of council now, and there are certain members in this particular slide who are no longer with us because of expired terms and so forth. Then it takes us through the numbers of meetings held and the attendant register. We can then move on to the next slide. This is an overview on the council-led regulatory projects, which were divided into policy research and analysis, engineering and technology, as well as licensing. And then the projects are detailed below. Thank you. I would like to hand over to, or just before I do so, we then have standing governance council committees, honorable members, which are the audit and risk, ethics and disclosures, information technology review, as well as human resources and remuneration committee. We then have the consumer advisory panel on the other hand, which deals with consumer matters as dictated to by the Act, as well as the complaints and compliance committee, the CCC, which is more of our tribunal to deal with the disputes and issues of non-compliance. I would like to hand over to the CEO to just briefly take us through, from slide 21, and then he will then hand over to the CFO later at the later stage to the Chief Audit Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members. The section that I will deal with, Chair, covers how we have dealt with human resource management in the year under review in terms of implementing the HR strategy and the accompanying organizational development strategy, as well as the workplace skills plan. I'd like to move to the next slide, which basically outlines the staff complement and the vacancies that we have had in the year under review. And we have broken that down per occupational level. And I think the key takeaway on this slide, Chair, is that we basically managed to keep our vacancy rate at 3.7% in the year under review. And we have also given a sense of the exact number of vacancies that we have had during the year per occupational level. And the members would notice that for the 2019-20, we have really spoken about the number of employees in the approved positions, as well as the number of active vacancies. And we use the phrase active vacancies because we have adopted a pragmatic approach in terms of how we fill vacancies as and when they arise. Because of our financially constrained environment, we have a moratorium on recruitment. Therefore, we only recruit for positions that we deem critical to the continued operations in the organization. Where a vacancy arises and we are able, based on our own assessment, to continue functioning without filling it, we make a deliberate decision to save on the employee costs in respect of that vacancy and not fill it. I would like to move on to the next slide, which talks to the HR costs per division. And again, this slide illustrates the point I'm making around our approach to recruitment as and when vacancies arise. And the one outlier on this slide would obviously be the compliance and consumer affairs, where the members would see that we had a serious, I would call it a saving in terms of the personnel costs in that division, and that was due to the fact that the position of the head of the division became vacant, and we resolved not to fill it because we felt that we could we were able to leverage the coordination and the efficiencies from regions as well as licensing. I must emphasize, Chair, that the fact that we didn't fill the position did not in any way adversely affect performance of that program. This is one of the programs, as per the performance outlined by the Chair, that achieved 100% in the year in review. In terms of the next slide, we have highlighted some of the employee changes from an attrition perspective in the year in review. So we have had there are a number of reasons why people leave, and employees have the choice or the discretion to either conclude exit interviews or not to conclude exit interviews. The members would know that the number of resignations in 2018 and 19 and in 19 and 20 has remained the same. So we've experienced about 10 resignations in both years, and those resignations primarily come from the professionally qualified and the skilled category. And the reasons primarily are around people finding better opportunities. And it boils down to our inability to counter offer in each and every instance. So there are instances where we are able to counter offer when employees come to us and say they've had a better opportunity, but they would like to stay within the organization. But there are instances where, because of the constraints and the parameters that we have set ourselves in terms of our policies, we are unfortunately left with no choice but to allow them to leave. The next slide talks to our performance in respect of our employment equity statistics and targets. And again, we've broken it down per occupational level, and we've also broken it down per gender. And I think the figures are clear and they are self-explanatory. The important slide, Chair, I think in respect of which I guess we need to do more is the next slide, which talks to our performance when it comes to people living with disabilities. Next slide, Tom. The slide clearly shows, Chair, that from a top management and a senior management perspective, we obviously have no representation. We have some representation in professionally qualified, as well as in the skilled technicians and the semi-skilled. And as I say, Chair, if you look at the total number of employees in the organization, we only have a total of 5, and I guess it's an area that remains a continuous challenge for us, which we endeavor to improve on year in, year out. The last slide on this section, Chair, talks to employee relations matters. I think the key area of improvement when you look at 2019 versus 18-19, when you look at 2019-20 versus 2018-19, is that we have had no labor court matters, we have had no high court challenges, and our CCMA referrals have gone down. On the other side, the number of internal grievance processes has increased. In 18-19, we didn't have any grievances, but in 19-20, we have seen about 8. I guess the one way to look at it is to say that it's an indication that employees have some confidence in dealing with matters through the internal grievance procedures, as opposed to opting to refer them outside as a first port of call. Chair, that concludes this section. I'll pause here and allow the CFO to talk to the financial performance.
Good morning, honorable members, colleagues, and council members. With regard to the finances, starting with slide, the financial position, Chair, One issue to highlight here is actually the decline in terms of our accumulated surplus, because on year in year out, our surpluses are decreasing. Is mainly due to the fact that we don't have much cash to retain at the end of the financial year. However, we managed to capitalize some of the assets during the financial year. Move to the next slide, Tom. Chair, the financial position, slide 31. On slide 31, the main issue to highlight there, Chair, is actually on the revenue from exchange transaction. Bulk of this amount, the Chair, comes from interest we generate from investment. So with regard to the current financial year, we under-collected by 2 million, mainly because we did not have sufficient funds to invest for a longer period. We solely rely on the income that we collect from the operators or licenses, and we invest that for a period of 30 days as required by our Act. If we go to the employee-related cost share, because the ICASA has actually started the financial year with a moratorium, you will notice that there's a 2 million movement if you compare with prior year, mainly because that moratorium was maintained in the current financial year due to the financial limitations that we have. General expenditure, we had to actually monitor the expenditure leg in line with the approved budget, and that actually left us with a 3.5 million surplus. And the revenue from, or the grant allocation for the financial year was received in full from the department. Next slide. Overview on the cash flow, Chair. We have closed our financial year with a bank balance of 69.4 million. If you look at the note on the cash and cash equivalent, is more than this amount. Bulk of that relates to the funds that we transfer to the National Revenue Funds on monthly basis. So the net bank balance that relates to ICASA main account is 69.4 million, which is declining on annual basis, Chair. And as indicated, these funds will not be sufficient to honor all expenses accrued at year end. That simply says we need to finance some of our operational costs from the grant allocation for the 2020-21 financial year. How we manage the deficit and the challenges brought by the budget cuts over the years, we had to reduce our operating expenditure budget to allow sufficient budget for all rollover projects from the last financial year. A moratorium was also approved for the 2019-20 financial year, which continued in the current financial year. So just to make sure that we also reduce the spending on the employee-related cost. In terms of the cash flow and the statement of the going concern issues that were raised by the AG, we have prepared our financial statements audited by the AG on a going concern basis, simply because we strongly believe we will still be able to get our grant allocation of the 477 that was allocated for financial year 2020-21. So we are hoping that we will still be able to generate additional revenue from the investment to cater for some of the funds or the projects that we need to finance for the next financial year. Moving to the next slide. On the budget versus actual amounts, Chair, we budgeted a total amount of 452, and we have actually collected 456. But mainly because of the revenue that we recognize from the rollover funds, mainly from the ASMS system that we have actually rolled over to the current financial year. And those funds, as and when we pay, we then recognize the allocation that we pay on monthly basis. In terms of the next slide, Chair, the comparison on the expenditure leg, these are the movements that we have reported in terms of the allocation. Our budget was 505 million. We have only spent at 465 million, leaving us with a difference of 39.9 million, mainly from the general expenses because we had to reduce spending on some of the budget line items. Chair, next slide, Ato. The next slide is detailing some of the reasons why we had to actually reduce the cost. For example, if you go to bullet number 4, it's the one that relates to the general expenditure. There's significant reduction, wherein we had to reduce purchasing of promotional material during the financial year and less advertising cost that was actually spent. Training was also delayed in terms of implementation of some of the training intervention. Limitation on travel expenses during the current financial year. we had to implement the moratorium as it is guided by the National Treasury Instruction Note. The use of a consultant was also minimized in the current financial year. Chair, from my side, that's all with regard to the actual finances of the organization. I'll hand over to the CAE to continue with the audit outcomes.
Good morning, Chairperson, honorable members, CEOs, and the members, the House at large. I'm going to take you through the audit findings as depicted in our AG's report. On the first slide, Chairperson, you would note that ICASA's audit outcomes have remained stagnant for 3 years, and we received an unqualified audit opinion with findings. But it's important that I qualify that statement as well to indicate that unlike the previous financial year, we have received an unqualified audit opinion this year. However, there were no material adjustments that were made to the financial statements, and there were no material misstatements that were noted for our performance information. So that's quite an improvement from our side. Although if you're looking at the report, there really has not been anything that's been flagged as an improvement. So that you will only note when you read the detailed audit report from AG. The next slide, Chairperson. Key issues that are really preventing us from getting a clean audit, and as you may be aware that these three are related to the SCM environment. It's an area that we are closely monitoring and we are attending to, but just to give you an overview of what happened. For expenditure management, 3 million was reported as a regular expenditure in the 2019-20 financial year. The amount that has been reduced comparatively speaking, and Chairperson, it's important to note. The 3 million, if I were to give you context again, relates to the contract management side, where we were maintaining the spectrum. AG was of the view that we needed to go back and bid or open up the bidding process. So this is a result of us continuing with the legacy contract for the system of spectrum that we've been having, and we were renewing it for a number of years. But I must indicate that in the following financial year, we will be implementing a new spectrum system, and this would really eradicate the problem that we are having. For consequence management, Chairperson, AG did raise an issue, as you are aware, of the newly amended Public Audit Act, that in line with that act, they are worried about us. But the issue that they raise here does not really relate to the 2019-20 financial year. So they said, Mr. CEO, we're quite happy that you've implemented some action and you took some disciplinary measures. However, you also need to, you have not fully implemented consequence management for prior years. Procurement and contract management, there were 3 areas where we could not get competitive codes, and these again relate to the spectrum system, where we have a few people with expertise in South Africa that can help us maintain and renew or use this management that I've already talked to, Chairperson. To the next one, Tom, thank you, sorry about that. Chairperson, we are really taking this very seriously, and as a result have developed an audit action plan that would ensure that these findings that the internal audit are flagged and tracked on a quarterly basis. So we have a plan that's been monitored not only by council but by the audit committee as well, even internal audit. So we are just giving you a summation here to say, for getting a clean report, a clean audit, we are 50 to 75% almost there to make sure that we really deal with these issues. So on a continuous basis, we have proactive assurance that we've introduced to make sure that the bids, by the time they are awarded, we've checked and make sure that, you recall when we were here, we talked about us having prevented a 90 million worth of potentially irregular expenditure using the methods that we introduced. If we go to our next step B, other important matters, you would see that for some, we are almost at 100%, for some between 50 and 75, indicate that really concerted efforts are underway to ensure that we improve on these environments. Thank you.
Thank you, ICASA. On the dot, 25 minutes. May we then take the next presentation, FPB?
Chairperson, good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sarah Mangena, the Deputy Chairperson of FPB. And today we are coming to present our annual report. I am with Lori Les, that is the SSE, Abongile Mashele, who is the acting CEO, and Mohammed Chowani, who is our CFO. Then I'll have to hand over to Abongile Mashele to continue. Thank you.
For the outcome of our reprioritization in terms of cash flow. We can go to capitalization plan.
Good morning, members. And we are here to present the annual performance report of the Film and Publication Board for the year ending 31 March 2020. Here with the signal. We are presenting the performance. We are a Schedule 3 public entity established in terms of the Film and Publications Act of 1996, which was charged with the regulation of the creation, possession, and distribution of films, games, and certain publications to ensure that we safeguard and protect children through the imposition of age restriction. And also another important element to the mandate of FPB is that our legislation criminalizes the creation and become known as child sexual abuse material. And we basically, that is what we do as the FPB. In our presentation, we largely focus on the first slides, focus on the, okay, I'm not sure it's not moving. The first slides just outline our contribution as the board to the development goals as well as the National Development Plan. I'm not sure if the slides are not moving, so let me just try and escape and see. Apologies for that, Chair. The first couple of slides just take us through our contribution as the FPB to the Sustainable Development Goals as well as Outcome 14 of the National Development Plan. Our vision and mission is as it is encapsulated in our strategy map, which is to be a leading and credible content regulators. And we do this through ensuring effective child protection, empowerment of consumers, and contribution to the economic growth of industry through the regulation of media content. Now we do this through 5 strategic outcomes: visible monitoring of the industry through the entire value chain. The second one, which is just as important, is through outreach and awareness campaigns. In terms of the entity. And the fourth one is through innovative regulation, which has increasingly become a big player in the market that we operate in as the FPB. And the last part of the strategy outcome that we work on is ensuring that we expand the FPB footprint through effective partnership and stakeholder relations, because we have realized that we would not be able to fulfill the role and the mandate of the FPB without effective partnerships. And this is the strategy map. I will not go into detail on this one, Chair. I think we would love to have an opportunity with the committee where we can relate to roadmap of the FPB and the business model of the institution. If we go to the annual performance of the institution, in the year under review, we achieved 75% of the planned targets of the institution, and 25% of the targets were not achieved. We achieved 100% of the targets in SO1, which is the effective regulation and ensuring compliance of the films and gaming distribution value chain. We achieved 100% of the targets. In our SO2, which is our outreach and awareness target outcome, we achieved 1 and 2, the other one was not achieved. In SO3, we achieved 6 of the planned 7 targets. In SO4, which is our ICT in SO5 as well, we had 2 targets, we did not achieve both. If you look at the right hand, we are explaining the reasons for variance, especially for the targets that were not achieved. In SO2, which is the outreach and awareness and communications target, we were meant to achieve 100% of the annual communications plan, because activations that were scheduled for March could not proceed due to the state of disaster regulations that came into place early in March, and placing restrictions in terms of gatherings that we could have as an institution. And then in SO3, the one target that was not achieved is the target of ensuring 100% implementation of the WSP, which is the Workplace Skills Plan, WSP, and that's largely because we delayed finalizing and approving the WSP, because earlier in the year, there were a number of skills gaps that we identified, and we requested the staff at FPB to actually go and look at their personal development plans to ensure that we can close the gaps that have been identified and align skills development programs to the movement and development of the organization, which is more in the direction of online regulation. So that is one of the areas that we had to focus on. In SO4, we had a target of ensuring 100% implementation of the ICT plan. We only managed to achieve 93.5% of the plan. And this is largely due to capacity challenges in ICT, as other entities have indicated. The moratorium that we had last year in respect to recruitment did impact in terms of filling the vacancies that we had in the organization. And it hit us really hard in the ICT division of the institution. So we had a vacancy of the ICT manager and the systems administrator. And these are technical skills, the obligations in the ICT plan. I'm happy to say that we have subsequently recruited, and we have filled the ICT manager position, and the systems administrator will be starting in the next month. In SO5, the 2 targets that were not achieved were also negatively impacted by the COVID regulations. We were planning on having a workshop with SADC regulators similar to the FPB, as well as other regulators in the African continent, because we have been working, as the committee may be aware, we have been working towards developing the African continent, so that in the online market, it is easier for us when the global streaming companies come in. We say that this is the preferred content regulation or classification continent. Just to give highlights to the committee, the registration and renewals that we received, we processed a total of 3,853 applications that we received from the industry for registration purposes. I think one important thing that we need to flag in as far as registration is that we've seen a decline in physical stores for registration. And I think that's largely because when you go to your local mall, you no longer find them as the videos. So we have actually identified the gradual decline in physical distribution points in the South African market in as far as film, games, and other publications. In the of 17 online distributors that are operating in the South African market, 9 are international and 8 are local. And as the FPB, we have managed to license 5 of those, and they've actually adopted the South African content classification model on their platform, so that when, as a consumer, you watch an online streaming platform, you are able to identify and identify the content that has been flagged as harmful to ensure that it is reflective of the South African system. So we have been making some leeway, and I think with the Amendment Act, it has also assisted us in as far as the role of the Film and Publication Board when it comes to regulating content on over-the-top services. In terms of submissions of content that we have received, similar to what I've already indicated on registration, we've seen a decline. So this slide is just to show you in the last 5 years, the year-on-year decline, a 37% decline in content that we have been receiving as the FPB. And this will also have an impact. You'll see when the CFO presents on the financials, it has an impact in terms of revenue generation, because we charge for the classification process. So we have seen a decline, a year-on-year decline as well, in as far as content submitted for classification. I'll take them as read. We just wanted to demonstrate the types of content that we have received over the year, as well as the nature of the content that is being distributed in the South African market. And I think it is worthy noting that year on year, we are increasingly seeing an increase in strong violence and strong language, especially and games. And I think that's just something that should be noted by the committee as well as the public at large, because it has an impact on societal values and norms as well. From a child protection perspective, in the year under review, these are the cases that we assisted the South African Police Service to analyze. We received cases from Gauteng, Western Cape, KZN, and the Free State, where our child protection officers analyzed content so that the police can use in the docket, in the prosecution, especially for the possession of child sexual abuse images in South Africa. We received a total of 15 cases in the year under review. And the trends that should be noted is that the perpetrators, the images that we found were not generated by the perpetrators, but they were in possession of the images. These images are largely collected from different websites, and a collection is created. None of these cases were concluded in the year, and I think there was one in the Western Cape who was recently sentenced, and the FPB in the background does contribute in the prosecution of those cases. These are just the compliance monitoring statistics to the committee, just to show that in the year we conducted 10,953 visits and we issued 679 notices, and these were largely the areas of non compliance, it's unclassified material, and this is one area of the board. We are not an institution charged with dealing with piracy, but through our compliance monitoring activities, we pick up non-compliant distributors and we actually confiscate the material. And most of the time you will find that the material that we confiscate, it's pirated goods. So we distracted, these are the goods that we distracted to the value of 30 million in the year under review. And these are the stores that we closed. We worked together with the South African Police Services to ensure that they are closed across the country for non-compliance to the Formal Publications Act. I will not go into detail on the Formal Publications, the regulations, because I think the committee is aware of. Actually finalized the draft regulations. We are currently undergoing the public engagement. We should be publishing the second draft of the regulations, hoping we will be able to finalize in the current financial year so that the provisions, the Amendment Act provisions can come into effect in the new financial year. From the outreach and awareness perspective, this is just to demonstrate some of the activities that we've done in the year under review, our flagship programs, and I think worthy to note is Safer Internet Day, which is a program that we embark on at the beginning of the year, every year, where we focus on safer internet and cyber safety tips, especially for young people and increasingly older people, on how to protect themselves online. And these are the numbers of learners that we have reached throughout the country. We try by all means to have a presence in each and every province as the FPB, but as you know, we are quite a small entity, so we're unable to go and we visit schools and we talk to children about digital literacy, safe consumption of media content, and online protection. And then this is our media attraction and penetration, and I think worthy to note is that our comms team focuses a great deal on community media platforms, and I think it has assisted us to get more intimately known in certain communities as the FPB. From a human capital perspective, these are the stats in terms of the staff at the FPB, and I think if you look at it, it's the vacancy rate. At a senior support staff, we had a 14% vacancy rate, senior management 8%, and executive 40%. And in the year under review, we had one dismissal for misconduct. I will not go into detail on all the stats. I think the committee has a purview of all the information. I'll now hand over to the CFO to take over the finance part. Mohammed, over to you. CFO.
My apologies, Chair. I was speaking to a muted mic. Good morning, Chair, and the committee members and colleagues. I will take you through the financial position performance of the entity for the financial year ending 31 March 2020, as well as through the audit outcome and compliance matters. In front of you is our financial position for the financial year. In terms of the assets of the entity, you will note, Chair, that our receivables decreased from 4.5 to 3.1 million, and that was due to better collection. We disclosed statutory receivables separately as there was a change in the standards of GRAP, and you will note the increase from 2,600 to 2.4 million. But Chair, that was a result as at year end for mainly online distributors who had not yet paid the FPB, the the annual fee, and these have been subsequently collected in the new financial year. And then also to draw your attention to our reserves, which were healthy as at year end of 23.5 million. And then on this slide here, Chair, the only other item to draw attention to would be the intangible assets, which has a note 6 next to it, which is about 10.5 million rands. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in detail a little later in the presentation. Abu, we can go now to the slide on financial performance. It's slide 45, Abu. Okay, one slide up, Abu. Thank you. Chair, in terms of the financial performance of the FPB, you will note here that we had a small decrease in our regulation fees. The acting CEO did mention about the decrease in the content, which is sent for classification. So in the bucket of regulation fees, you will note that we dropped from 7.9 to 6.3 million. We did have an increase in terms of our investment income, which is mainly the interest received, and that was due to better planning and depositing of funds. And then the other item to note would be the slight increase in our grants and subsidies from 94.5 million to 99.3 million. So in the end, Chair, we recorded a surplus for the period of 4.3 million. Abu, we can go to the slide on the performance against budget. Slide 47. Okay. Chair, you will note here, this is our statement of our budget against our actual, which then depicts the performance of the organization against its approved budget. Just to point out that we do have a midterm review in each financial year, and during the review that was held in half year of 2020, we did recognize that we estimated we would get more fees from for classification and from our online content providers. Hence, we did adjust by 1.3 million rands in that year. However, some of that did not come to fruition at the close of the financial year. Abu, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. So also then on the expenditure side, Chair, you will note that there was an underspending in admin costs. And the reason is that management implemented various cost containment measures on items such as travel and workshop. Okay. Next slide, please, Abu. Okay. In terms of the audit outcome of the FPB, you will note that we regressed in terms of we had achieved a clean audit in the financial year ending 2019, but in the this current financial year, we were still unqualified. However, there were some material findings. And then in the next slide, I want to share with the committee the context of what actually was these findings. Chair, this is not meant to be an excuse from the FPB, but rather to bring committee members into the picture in terms of what we experienced during the audit. The audit team was changed. I wouldn't even say midway through the audit. It was changed very late in the audit, such that the team that we had from last year, and I mean from the manager down to the actual trainee clerks who do the work, changed. So the team that did the planning for the audit was totally different from the team that came in. Now, why am I saying all of this? Well, in terms of what our findings were, I spoke about the intangible assets, which is mainly computer software that the FPB is developing in the online content space. We have spent about 9 million rands to date on that. Chair, we disclosed it in the same manner in the notes now. So this is not regarding anything about the actual journal transactions or on the face of the financials, but in the notes. We disclosed it in the same way as we disclosed it in the previous financial year. However, the new team had a different interpretation of the standards, and they requested us to, or their view was that it needs to be distinguished between intangible assets that are in use as well as intangible. We had a finding on that, but we record on our financials. The next item, Chair, relates to the disclosure of the statutory receivables. So that is any receivables which are still, any income which is still outstanding from due to statutory nature of it at year end. And we disclosed it as we had done in the previous year as income received in advance. So for the portion that had not yet been earned. However, they requested that we show it as deferred revenue, disclose it using that term. So that was the other finding. And then the last one was with regards to the compliance matter, which regarding the irregular expenditure. The total irregular expenditure for the FPB for the current financial year, for the financial year that we are presenting is 1.1 million rands, and I will go in detail on that in subsequent slides. You can move now, Abu. Thank you. Chair, now in terms of, I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee, the FPB's triple BEE targets and what we have achieved. You will note that our target was 75% contribution level of 3 and lower, and we achieved 81%. We also have another target that 30% of all transactions are assigned to priority groups, and for that we achieved 47%. So what makes up the 47%? It would be female-owned businesses at 26%, the youth-owned businesses at 19%, and persons with disabilities at 4%. And Chair, we are actively trying to grow the last component of persons with disabilities. We are working with National Treasury to better identify on the CSD those companies that are owned by persons with disabilities, so that we are also mindful of our role in the economy and in growing the economy as per the targeted groups. Abu, you can move it now. We can go to the irregular expenditure. Okay, Chair, In terms of the irregular expenditure that was incurred, firstly, there was payments. One of the broad buckets was when payments were made beyond the contract value. Now, what in the FPB resulted in these things happening? Chair, number one, I think, and again, we don't want to make excuses, but it is the reality that we have a lot of capacity constraints, where not even within the EXCO, we have, we have 2 jobs, but also, in the lower levels and during the year. So in terms of getting new contracts, the actions were taken in terms of advertising before the current contracts could expire. However, we were unable to close out due to some capacity constraints. And then the other factor that we experienced, Chair, during the year that we are talking about is the directive to not enter into long-term contracts. So we had included in our TORs a clause that we would want to terminate a contract prior to the end of 3 years and not incur any penalties. And then we saw that also had a effect on the quality of the suppliers who were willing to go according to that. Next slide, Abu. Thank you. Then on this slide here, what I want to bring to your attention, Chair, there was 2 points, which was identified by the Auditor General and was not on our irregular register. There was a deviation of 166,000 rands for the placement of adverts that was not approved by the appropriate level of authority. There was an approval, but it was the AG had found that it was not the appropriate level. And then the second one, the last one there, the no SLA in place of services of employee benefits administrator. This was an ongoing, very old item with regards to the fees paid for the administration of the retirement benefits and disabilities for the entity. This has been corrected, Chair. A tender process during the year under review was conducted, and we have, through that process, appointed a service provider that started on 1 April 2020, and you will not have that, see that next year. Then just to note that all matters are referred to our Theft and Loss Committee for investigations, and consequence management is implemented for matters which have been concluded by the committee. Next slide, please, Abu. And then this is just the other 2 items that make up the 1.1 million. Abu, we can go to fruitless and wasteful now. Thank you. Chair, I'm pleased to advise that there was no new cases of fruitless and wasteful in the 2019-20 financial year. The organization did recover 6,800 rands from employees who had missed flights. And then there was an amount of 9,000 rands that we had to write off due to non-recoverability. And that, Chair, concludes the financial side of the presentation. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just unshare the document. Okay, thank you. Honorable members, we are now going to engage the presentations. You would indicate on which presentation you are speaking to so that the entity concerned can take notes, so that when responses are to be made, they will respond in the order that they presented to the meeting. I will then now recognize hands from those members who would want to engage the presentation. Honorable Faku, I see your hand is up on the system. May I just check if I'm not leaving any other member? Ajra, on that side, do you see any other hands?
Nothing else on my side, Chair. Mr. Mackenzie now, Chair.
Honorable Mackenzie's hand is up. So you recognize Honorable Mackenzie as number 2. You'd follow Honorable Faku, followed by Honorable Kubeka. So you can recognize Kubeka. I'll take those 3 hands for now. Parliament YouTube streamer, please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. Honorable Faku, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and greetings to yourself and greetings to honorable members. Chair, let me apologize. My camera will be off. I was struggling with network. I was in and out. Let me also greet everyone that is in the meeting, all entities and the board chairs and board members that are present. Chairperson, let us welcome all the presentations that we have received today. Let me start with PPI. First, I was hoping, since we have an apology both from the minister and the deputy minister, one would have wanted to understand, as we know that we are talking about measures of these entities, perhaps can we get a time frame from the department, the measure between BPI and Centec, if one can get at least the time frames. One is hoping perhaps they would say by the end of March next year, before we start the new financial year. But let us congratulate the good work that BPI has done. I'm happy, when 2 entities, this is where you are not going to have a problem, Chair. When 2 entities are merging, and when you look at their performance, it's not bad. Of course, there are areas of improvements that is there, but under the circumstances of COVID-19 and everything, they've done well. BPI received an unqualified audit, achieved 68% of the shareholder compact, revenue increase of 40%. We know that we've been faced with COVID, and we know that our status as a country, but we must say that BPI, you have done exceptionally well. It's not the best, but it's better, because others did not even make a revenue of 14%. Let us also appreciate the payment of SMMEs within 19 days. This is very good. This is very good. And Chairperson, let us also congratulate the good work they've done in terms of SA Connect sites. The main target was 400, but they've underachieved, I think, with about 67, which is not bad, especially under the circumstances. We're under a national lockdown. Let us also appreciate this. We know that our government is talking about us investing in local business. SMMEs that received work for local installation, which I believe that it creates a job opportunities within those areas. Let us appreciate that, Chair. And also let us appreciate black-owned business by women, 44%. This is good, because most of the departments struggle to achieve this target. And we know that in terms of, we are saying that we must empower women. We want to see more in the next financial year, increase by 20%. Let us see 64%, because men always are the ones who are the winners at the end of the day. But let us empower these women. Let us appreciate that. We see a cost of sales increase. In the last financial year, it was 181, now it's 216. It's good, because when you look at other entities, you will not find this. So, Chair, let us congratulate the good work that BPI has done. And then when we go to NEMISA, Chair, I must be honest to say that I am not happy with the performance of NEMISA. I'm not happy at all. Audit findings clearly tell us that NEMISA is not doing well. They've got an unqualified audit opinion. Sorry. They've fruitless expenditure, irregular expenditure. I think these ones, especially, I think this is because program 3 they have not done well. They have not achieved most of their targets because of their inadequate tools of reporting and recording. And I think this, Chair, we must not take it lightly as a committee, because this is taxpayers' money. You are given money to train people, and now you are saying it's because audit, this is where audit did not agree. Audit would not agree because you are the ones who are setting the standards of how these trainings will be done. But if your reporting tools don't speak to your policies, then it's going to be a problem. Audit will always those gaps. So I think, Chair, let us really say to NEMISA, this is not acceptable at all. I also see that there were some litigations for people that went to the CCMA and all of that. I'm not sure why do we repeat this thing? Why are we wasting taxpayers' money? When you have lost a case at CCMA, why do you want to proceed and use money that was meant to do something else, and you will go and want to review these cases? So for me, I must say, Chair, I'm not happy. And then, Chairperson, when you come to ICASA, although they've regressed from 91 to 86, I think it's fairly fair, especially with the circumstances. There was a period there was not a board. I think it's not bad, but they know that there's a high expectation when it comes to them, which is good. It's fair. There's also a high expectation share of the high spectrum demand. We know that ICASA has set a date. We're hoping that that date will not change, because this is where our economy will grow. We depend on the release of the spectrum on the set date by ICASA. We believe that this will create job opportunities for our people as well. My only concern, Chair, can I maybe get an explanation, because I see that they've underachieved in terms of their public hearings, and I understand it's due to COVID, because we don't want them when the date for them to release the spectrum, and then there will be litigations and all of that in terms of public hearing. Can we get a briefing of an explanation? Do they think they are going to meet the set targets for the public hearings? Chairperson, and then on the issue of the national sports review broadcast sports event, I see that they did not meet this target. Can we also get maybe an explanation? Maybe when will this, because we understand now maybe the focus is mainly on the spectrum. Can we get an explanation with that? And then, Chair, I see with all these entities, there's an issue of contract management. There is a problem. I think it's an area that we need to improve, because audit findings that are coming, although they have improved for ICASA, but it's still the same audit findings they have found in the previous financial year. I understand at some point, I think the CFO was suspended, and there's another one. I'm not sure if I'm correct, they will correct me. But I think it's things that we need to improve on, Chairperson. And then FBP. I must say that also I'm a bit disappointed, because this is one entity in the last financial year that have done exceptionally well. They have not done bad even now, but I think they can do better, because they do have the capacity to do better. I hear the CFO when he explained to say that they've regressed from their audit finding from the last financial year to this one. Yes, you have regressed. Capacity issues will always be issues. When you say that the previous staff members were there, but now they have moved to another, there's a handover period, so that cannot be an excuse. And I think you have also alluded to that. It can never be an excuse when people pay more for a tender than what was expected for. I think, Chair, let us be clear on that. On the child protection, can I get an explanation when SAPS gives you these cases, or if no matter how you get them, when you have to analyze these cases, how long does it take? Because you know we have a lot of gender-based violence, especially on children, but also when it's on the internet. It is. Can you tell us how long do you analyze? How long do you analyze these cases, Chairperson? But let me stop there. I'll come back again. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Faku. Honorable Mackenzie.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairperson. And thank you to the colleagues for the presentation and all protocol observed. Chairperson, I think I think Honourable Fargo and I were in the same study group because she said much of what I wanted to say. So thank you for that, Honourable Fargo. If I can just emphasise some of the things she said and support. I think in terms of BBI, it's very good to see your involvement in SA Connect, the fact that the buildings are being connected and being connected effectively. So I applaud you for the work you've done there, and I think it's a great move on behalf of the department as well. I'm sorry the Minister isn't here, so I couldn't congratulate her personally. If I can just raise also your 99.76% of network availability is excellent. That's damn close to 100%. I'd imagine that your customers would be very happy. I was just sorry to see that there were some financial penalties imposed for I presume network downtime, and that's a pity because that's a pretty good record, and I'd like to congratulate you on that as well. If you can just give me an idea in terms of your network uptime, have you benchmarked this against other companies in your sector, both locally and internationally? And how, if you have, how does your network uptime compare favorably or not against those benchmarks? Then also, if I can echo Honourable Faku, your 19-day settlement, even though the target is 14 days, your 19-day settlement of SME invoices really should be applauded. Small business is dependent on who hasn't been always great in paying. So, you know, that kind of thing keeps businesses alive and survive and thrive. So I'd congratulate you on that. And also your debtor days, I mean, to get those down from 54 to 18 is really good work. Your 4% OPEX increase is well in line with inflation. Again, really good work. So when we look at the overall trends for BBI, I think you can walk away from this committee feeling quite proud of what you've accomplished, because your trend lines seem to be moving in all the right directions. And then that refers to quite a few SOEs, actually. Not the big ones, but certainly the ones in our department. I was also interested to see you spend 1.83% of your payroll on training. I'm big on training and capacitating people. What is the usual bench? What is the standard? You know, I mean, I know in municipalities you're supposed to spend 6% on maintenance of your capex budget. What are you? What is generally the standard of the payroll percentage that's spent on training by organisations in your sector? And that's the end of BBI. Thank you very much, gentlemen. In terms of ICASA, let me start off and congratulate Dr. Murimeng and all the other newly appointed councillors. We fought very hard in this committee to get you elected, and I think the process was great, and I'm sure you're going to be great in your job. And I would just urge you to keep your Chapter 9 status and the independence of your entity at the forefront of your mind. Congratulations on your surplus as well. I think we're very pleased to see that. In terms terms of your market review, I know you started the market review and it's very comprehensive, and you've drawn together a lot of players and a lot of information. In terms of the market review, when you started, then the competition came in, and the Competition Commission, and produced another market review on data costs, which was fairly thin in substance, but I'm not sure the word to use, kind of came in the middle of your process, started and finished while your process was continuing, if I'm seeing this correctly. When is your market review going to be completed? And given the Competition Commission's impact, what kind of impact do you see your market review having? Is there still space for it, basically? Then in terms of, I see one of your line items is computer equipment rental. ICASA, do you take advantage of the services offered by the State Information Technology Agency, SITA, to source your software and computer hardware and other communications equipment? And in terms of revenue, you said your revenue is exclusively a government grant. In terms of the revenue from electronic communications licenses, existing spectrum that's out there, is there any other revenue stream that comes from that comes directly to you, or does that all go straight through to Treasury? I'd appreciate an answer there. Then just in terms of your the spectrum auctions and the release of spectrum, if you can just help me understand the process. The minister issues a policy directive to ICASA. ICASA then has a look at the policy directive and invites comments from the public. So you'll get comments from the public who don't want a mask in their rosebed. You'll get comments from Telkom that want masks everywhere. You'll get comment from Vodacom that want 3 masks at the highest building. So you'll get these comments in, and you then incorporate all these comments, and you then issue an ITA. So you don't, there's no stage, there's no step between incorporating the comments and then putting it out for public comment and saying, can you review this document? Is that correct? You then go straight to the ITA without actually getting back to the people who put in the public comments. I'd be interested in knowing an answer to that. Then, yeah, so well done, ICASA. If I can move to the to NEMISA, guys. Again, let me echo Honourable Faku. It's disappointing to see this kind of thing come before the committee, especially when your peers are doing so. Come Institute from Felisa, you need to turn off your mic. Thank you. Been with NEMISA from Professor Claasen's days when you were building up the collabs and you were telling us what the collabs were all about, and it seemed very exciting and it seemed to be very on track. The picture that's painted now is this thing is falling apart. If you can't keep a basic attendance register for people who are coming to your training, what are you doing? That is a core part of your business. The number of people that you're training, that is your mandate. And if you can't, and it's not just, I mean, it wasn't just one incident, it was all those things that you couldn't keep an attendance register of the people that you've trained. I think that's a horrific indictment on the way your company is run. Can you, you've spoken about advocacy and awareness campaigns for NEMISA. Can you give me 2 examples out of the 34 of those campaigns, where they were, what they were about, and roughly what their cost was, and how many people they reached? Just give me a snapshot of 2 of the 34. I'd appreciate that. Then, yeah, the attendance registers. That's just incompetence. That's. Once upon a time, you had a whole lot of broadcasting equipment in your premises in Auckland Park or Brixton, that sort of area. You then had a burglary where stuff was stolen. And it came to light that, in fact, NEMISA didn't even have an asset register. So when the police came and said, well, what was taken from the thing, from the premises, NEMISA said, well, we're not sure because we don't know what was there. Now you have millions and millions of rands worth of equipment. You have, I know you have a building in Cape Town, in Stellenbosch or something, a house that was donated to you. So, I mean, no, sorry, that's not NEMISA. So you have, but you have all this equipment. The house in Stellenbosch is yours. Do you have an updated asset register that details everything you own as assets? Then, are there any SIU investigations or disciplinaries currently taking place within NEMISA? If you can just give me some information on that, especially in terms of disciplinaries and staff. You said that. So I just need to wait for Laurie. There we are. You said that you postponed your training because of COVID. Now, with respect, NEMISA, National Electronic Media Institute. Electronic Media Institute. You don't need a room. You can conduct your training online. You should be quick and responsive and efficient enough to be able to turn your paper offerings into a digital offering very, very quickly and roll out online training. And we've seen other companies do that. We've seen other state-owned entities do that. We've seen Parliament do that. We've seen the DA hold a whole federal Congress online. Why can't NEMISA get their training online? And then you've said you've also funded 3 research reports. Can you just give me some information on those reports, please? NEMISA, I'm sorry to come down so hard on you, but I mean, even you guys must acknowledge that this is not perfect. Then finally, in terms of the thank you, Chairperson, with your indulgence, in terms of the Films and Publications Board, I do agree with you, ma'am, on the growing incidences of I think sex, nudity, violence, language in all the offerings that we serve. I mean, there's barely a movie or a series we watch where actresses and actors don't get naked these days. There's nothing to the imagination. So I agree, and that makes the work of your board all that more important. Can I just draw your attention to one of the logos in your slide? The internet is full of conspiracy theories about the Illuminati and Freemasons and stuff. So when you put an eye, one eye, with a triangle in the middle of it, you create all kinds of troubles for yourself amongst the conspiracy theorists that are out there. So maybe you just want to draw your design department's attention to that. Can I ask you also, in terms of the equipment that you buy, the computer equipment, the software, do you use the State Information Technology Agency to purchase your equipment? Because I saw there were some issues around that. And then a couple of months ago, there was lots of concern around the regulations that proposed the internet or the censorship of information posted on the internet. So me making a little video and putting it up on the internet would need to be classified. The road you are to sorting out that issue that seems to be worrying so many of our people, and just confirm that your intention, in fact, is not to censor the internet from enabling people to use its power to communicate with each other. Chairperson, thank you very much.
Honorable Mackenzie, Honorable Kubeka.
Thank you very much, Chair. And also let me greet the department, let me greet all entities who are present today, and also let me greet honorable members. Chair, also let me join the queue. Firstly, I will just start by BBI. I am aware, Chair, to say today all these entities that are presenting, indeed, they've managed to receive the unqualified report, whilst others in that unqualified, they have findings that they need to be attended to. Chair, under BBI also, let me appreciate to say, indeed, it means we never made a mistake when we have an interest to say it can merge maybe with Centec. And we can see that there is a progress at the moment on the side of the BBI, even if there is some hiccups somewhere, somehow. But as they have raised their targets, and also to say they've managed to receive that 68%, we also appreciate, but also work needs to be done more. And also let me appreciate, because I can see under the governance also, the relations chair. It shows that they are very good on the side of the board and also on the side of the executive, because you can see once the leadership attends their meeting orderly, you'll see now that the commitment is there on that side of BBI. So let me thank on that side also to say indeed that commitment, it will make them to work more harder than what we are expected, and also just to manage to achieve those challenges that they were encountered with. I realized that they were having a 15 audit findings chain, but it shows that they are trying to work on those findings. I hope if they can manage to work on those findings, that unqualified will shift to a qualified findings chain. So also I realize that under those targets, as they are raising to say, on the side of the sales, they have managed at least to push, even if they never managed to reach their targets. But you can see that the improvement is there, whilst also they have a decline on the side of their revenue. But as they have presented the reasons to say maybe it was because of that issue of lockdown, but I hope now things are trying to be relaxed a little bit. I hope they will try to push much more better. So let me also just appreciate, because you can see that they've managed even to go to the site of the rurals where they managed to connect the Lusikisiki clinic. We appreciate on that, because we know that on the side of the rural areas, issue of service delivery, it becomes a challenge, but now they are trying at least to extend their hand as they've managed to be there in rural areas. So thanks very much on that side, but we hope that you'll extend more than. But what is key is that thing of say the timeline, but I'm expecting maybe it will be the department who will just sensitize us, or to give us the final to say when the Centec and BBI is gonna be finalized on that issue of merging. So thanks very much, BBI. We are saying try more than that, but we are appreciating at least, because there is a big movement on the side of BBI. Chair, let me come to the side of NEMISA. Maybe firstly, let me say the issue of NEMISA, as we can see that we are not happy, all of us, but something they have tried to put on place. Maybe the frustration also is that side of saying they have raised to say the executive actually, it seems as if they were limping. Is then other key positions, just like this one of the risk management and that one of the SCA manager, they are saying is not so long that they have tried to fill those vacancies. Maybe we will say that is the side of NEMISA, as they are limping to say they will never manage to close the gaps where we can see, but it is critical, as you are raising, Chair, especially under the program 3. You can see that that's where NEMISA have never performed okay, Chair. It's a poor performance on program 3. Can they please try to accelerate and to correct? Because indeed, when you debate about the issue of the training and the logistics, whilst you are raising to say, it seems as if it's vice versa on the side of the numbers. And it's them who are putting the targets to say they want to reach this target. So it becomes a bad if you start to put the target, but you can't also even try to manage to come nearer to that target. So can they just try to correct that? But I can see on the side of the fruitless and wasteful expenditure, they have tried at least to reduce on that side. The issue is the side of the irregular expenditure, Chair. That's where the problem it is. So I'm aware that they are aware that they have a snap there that they need to correct. So can they please, NEMISA, try to pull up your socks on that side? But also, let me say, I've seen that you have managed also to reach on the side of the rural area when we were launching the Yaruna. We are also appreciating on that side, because indeed, as we are raising to say, rural areas also is a priority to us. We don't want to see services being on the urban or township, but not being managed to be extended on the side of the rural areas. So indeed, here, there is a serious challenge that you need to work harder in order that you can see how best can you manage to correct yourselves, especially under the side of the audit findings in NEMISA. So, Chair, let me go to the side of FPB. FPB, I appreciate, even though you have regressed, because last you have received a clean audit, but now you are aware what are the things that made you to regress. As you are saying on the side of the AG, AG tried to explain to you on that side of the disclosure of intangible assets and those ones of underdevelopment, to say you were supposed to distinguish there. That is the key thing. And also, if you can see how much did you spend there, that's the reason maybe that shows you to say correct it, even though you are raising to say it is new in this financial year. In those previous years, they never saw any challenge on this side of distinguishing, but try to work on that side, because now if it is a legislation in order to follow, we think you can manage to do that, FPB. But let me appreciate, because I can see on the side of the triple BEE, you have managed also to focus on the women and the youth, the disability. That's where you have also tried to stretch your hands in order that you can manage to work with those issues as we are raising, to say, let it be focus on those areas. And also, I can see that on the issue of the targets, you are fully much aware you have been disturbed by SO3 and SO5. And SO5, I think it was the issue as you are raising of the COVID. But this one of SO3, let me appreciate, because I can see that you are taking into consideration, especially on the outcome of the work of the skills audit, because other entities, it seems as if it is not a priority, the issue of using the skills audit. But I can see that FPB, you are taking it serious in order that to see if you are concentrating all that on that also, it can assist the entity to upskills or to retrain also, or to understand where it is the entity with the issue of their employees. So I congratulate you there, because indeed it will make you at easier even on the side of looking to say, is it possible to have more staff, or we are fine, or we need to reduce. But I'm not in that way of supporting the issue of reducing the staff if work is being there. On the side of the relations also, let me appreciate, because I can see when you are dealing with your cases, it's few cases that you have those litigation as you have raised it, but we are still saying as the committee, let the matters be dealt with inside rather than to take it in the courts. But I know that somewhere, somehow, it becomes beyond your doubts to say this one, it can't be resolved. It needs also another outside information in order to resolve those issues. But we are encouraging as the committee to say, work with your frustration, challenges inside the institution rather than prioritizing to take it outside the institution. So I would appreciate indeed, because anyway, it is an unqualified with those small things that needs to be corrected in order that you must move from that side of being regressing to go back to a clean audit FPB. So thanks very much on that side. Let me come to ICASA. ICASA, the spectrum, is a priority to us as the committee. I think there won't be any other story that we can hear rather than ICASA telling us to say, indeed, everything is in order, as they have given us the time frame of next year, 31st March. It will be exactly just like that on the issue of the spectrum. But I can see that you have managed to achieve 86.8%. You are left with 13.2 to those targets that you didn't achieve. But you know actually what are those targets that you need to correct. Can just ICASA follow it in order to cover the 100%? We will appreciate if ICASA can just follow that 13.2%. Also, let me appreciate, because now you've tried to present under HR to say, indeed, there is a challenge on the side of the vacancies, but you are trying to be flexible in order that you are not hampering the issue of service delivery, even if you have a challenge on the side of the vacancies, but you know how best can you try to close the gap in order that service delivery must be on par. And also, you know what is best to approach on the side of the recruitment, where you think it is necessary indeed to appoint on those vacancies. So we will appreciate, because we said have a plan, and it shows that on the side of the progress of plans, you've managed to say, even if Auditor General have raised those critical things that you are saying, you didn't manage to correct it under the side of the SCM, under the side of the consequence management. That's where Auditor General finds that you have some challenges under the contracts, and also on the issue of the procurement. Can you just try to correct and work speedily in order that you can at least move to a clean audit? But we appreciate, because you are saying, at least on the performance of information and also on the material statements, Auditor General this time never managed to receive any problem. So we are saying push on those three things that Auditor General have found, those findings, in order that you must be on the clean audit. But can I just get a clarity on the side of the mass carry regulation? How far with that an issue on the side as you were supposed to review on that side of the mass carry regulation. And also, I think Honorable Faku have raised the one of the sports rights. So without any waste of time, Chair, thanks very much to ICASA also.
Thank you, Honorable Kubega. I'm sure as the entities in the department would respond, maybe so that I don't come back to it, you respond at once. That maybe you would clarify the point raised by, I think, almost all the members who spoke on timelines on the merger, which the department must talk to BBI and Centec. But I think the difficulty is always that while you may be reporting on the previous financial year, the timing of that reporting is at the time when there would have been other activities in the year that should give a sense of where things are. Whether the business case issue has now been agreed, given that the 31st of October you are referring to in the document has passed. So if you can, as you respond to timelines, which the department must also talk to, but at least those areas where yourselves needed to agree on something, given that those dates would have passed, if you can. There is a point raised. I just want to be sure that it's raised correctly with NEMISA, that there is this problem about what you say it's prior year but identified in this financial year that you're dealing with. Now, I think there you also need to elaborate so that the committee has a better understanding of that, because it may be a point that is not resolved over a period of time, especially when you refer to it as a contractual issue. So that at least in the way the information is presented, we could be able to follow it so that we know that this is probably a 3-year thing and it ends in a particular year. And therefore it would mean it stays with you anyway until the matter is resolved, because it's something that is from a previous financial year, like as I said. Because it's contract, it may be that yes, contract awarded at that time, whether irregular or so, but the costs are starting to be incurred in the following years, and therefore this would be with yourself. So it's important to clarify us more proper on that, NEMISA. I think the part also that has been raised about the research work that he talked to, which he needed a sense of what that research is about. But because you are talking about, especially on the green side of things, talking about digital skills and so on, just couple that question of Honorable Mackenzie on what has been the contribution of those research reports that you had, the skill summits and so on, to the digital, the national strategy contributed to that we know it's been adopted. But secondly, how are you positioning yourself as NEMISA as a training institution? Firstly, in terms of government, because there's also on the public service side, School of Governance and the other entity that deals with IT training related matters and innovation, as well as also how it links up with the education system in the country, because that skill strategy begins to look at the future of work, and seeing this sector as an important sector to change the way the economy is going into the future. So that is your Department of Basic Education and the Department of Higher Education. Because if we want to change this, studies are showing that it has to be at that level so that it's in the system of the education. So I'm just building on that question that Honorable Mackenzie would have asked. May I also then quickly get to ICASA? Of course, I'm not emphasizing the points raised. I'm sure you'd understand we appreciate in all entities for all the good work that's being put, but just for the sake of time, getting to those points where maybe you need to elaborate. What I couldn't get, though, two things there. I think it's Honorable Kubeka appreciates that this part about AG raising 3 points and that you must deal with those points. Maybe if you can respond to the consequence management again. Look, in the absence of knowing what is in the management letter, we can only rely on what is presented before us. What's presented before us paints a picture that there have not been steps taken. And I'm saying there's not even referral to a prior year on what is put there, which would be helpful to put for purposes of presentation so that we know it's not a matter that's recurring in this financial year, which has happened before. But it's because there has not been action previously and therefore it's still raised now, which will then raise 2 questions. Whether the employees concerned are with the institution or they have left the institution, so that we also understand what could have then been the reason that no action was taken even in the previous financial year. Because then that helps us to really send the message, because the message that's out there sometimes that even when these problems have been identified, there is no will to act on such identified problems, leaving therefore a perception that there may be corruption and that it's left to continue that way. So as you respond to these points raised, please talk to that. But what I didn't understand, and correct me CFO here, because I would have wanted the department to also respond to it. Because I think as the committee, we should be concerned even with the ICASA on the going concern. I will still come to the one of PBI, but whilst on the ICASA, the going concern issue, you make reference to an approved grant and that you are still confident that that would come and therefore it changes the going concern issue that's being raised. As I say, I was just lost a bit there from where is the grant, and if it is a matter that gets through transfers, whether Treasury or the department, maybe that can be responded to as to what could be the problem. And you'll understand the problem will then be raised on the basis that you are referring to a previous financial year. What's being done now? Has that matter been resolved? Are we gonna experience it still in this financial year? And if it is just a matter of transfers, why has that not happened? Unless it's a different grant altogether, or I misinterpreted what you raised. As I said, it's the same thing with BBI. I think what members are saying, you could do even better. And in your own report, you are saying changing your balance sheet would help you to even do better, because you can then get into the market and be able to fund some of the programs of your infrastructure. But you talk to this pending signing by the Minister of DTI and Competition. Again, there maybe that's the point also with the department, that the understanding is both at the political level and administratively, there is a way of interaction, talking about people in the same cabinet. What could be the problem of it not being signed? But secondly, whether it is affected by what the Minister of Finance would have pronounced last year, that these loans would remain loans and that they must be paid back as such and not as equities. And you remember that there's already been that approval of conversion to equity. So I think that's important to get clarity as the responses are coming, so that we know whether BBI will remain where it is because of that, or that matter actually has received attention and it's now resolved. So please do come back to that. Maybe FPB, you will also respond on a point that has been raised about the reduction in submissions for classification and so on. Just to indicate whether there are indeed strategies at this point in order to respond to this, because it is the reality now that you'll have to deal with, that people go the streaming route and therefore reduces people who come before you. So if you can just indicate whether there are strategies, yes, they may have not been addressed in the previous financial year, but just give assurances to the committee that that matter is receiving attention. However, there's also a point there on irregular expenditure, which relates to ICT and so on. I think the question that we always ask as a committee, and I'll ask it again here, is that whilst you have those capacity problems leading you to get into contracts that may be a problem or not delivering at all, why has SITA, a state-owned company, would have not been utilized to close those gaps, but also to make sure that you maximize on economies of scale? So as you respond as different entities, please build in these questions which are about firming up on what has been raised by members already. I will then allow whether it is the department or the entities to respond first. But the responses will be in the order of your presentations. Just keep that in mind. BBI, NEMISA, ICASA, FPB. But the department, if they want to start to clear those that relate to the department, they can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you to the members for the questions. There was one main question that was directed to the department recurring from most of the members, and that is the question relating to the timeline for the measure of BBI and Centec. I wish to remind the committee chairperson that in terms of our APP for this current financial year, we are supposed to finalize the business case, which indeed has been finalized. Now the minister is in the process of sharing it with the ministers of finance and the minister of public service and administration, who require to give their concurrence to a business case of this nature. As we finalize the business case, we are also drafting the legislation which needs to support this measure, because both entities are creatures of statute, and therefore we need to create the legislation that supports and gives effect to the measure. According to our APP, the draft legislation by the end of the financial year would have been approved by Cabinet to be submitted to Parliament by the first quarter of the next financial year. Then chairperson, the legislation will be in the hands of Parliament and particularly the committee for as long as it takes. We do not expect it to be a complicated piece of legislation, and therefore could be finalized as soon as Parliament is able to do so. We will be there, chairperson, throughout to support that process. So that is the timeline, Chair. But notwithstanding the legal process or the legislation process that is underway, as BBI has indicated in their slide, which was similarly indicated in the slide by Centec. Work is going or is underway on the side of the entities themselves, working together. They have since developed the terms of reference for a service provider to help develop the strategy for the combined entities. And that work is scheduled also to be finished very soon. So, Chair, whilst the law will be evolving in terms of amending or establishing the new law governing the new entities, the work is going on the implementation side of this measure. There was a question, Chairperson, from yourself about this outstanding matter of the conversion of the BBI loan from government and IDC. The update, Chairperson, is that our minister, as one shareholder there in the entity, has approved the conversion of the BBI loan into equity. However, because we have a core shareholder in the organization, which is the IDC, which also requires to convert its own portion of the loan for the transaction to be concluded. That matter has not been concluded. Therefore, because in terms of Section 54(2) of the PFMA, this is a significant transaction for them and therefore requires the approval of their minister, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. So that is where the matter has been hanging for a while now, Chair. But we have had our Minister and DG both writing to the Minister and DG that side, respectively, trying to expedite the matter. We await an update from that side, Chairperson. On the last matter, Chair, relating to the ICASA grant around matters of going concern, I'm going to defer this one, Chair, to the CFO of ICASA, but I can just inform the meeting that there are no outstanding transfers from the department that are due to ICASA and were not made. But I think I can add that last year, in the last financial year, there was additional funding that was made available to ICASA to support the spectrum process. And in the same, the Minister of Finance again announced an allocation towards ICASA again for the spectrum process. Chairperson, thank you very much.
Thank you, TG. BBI, followed by NEMISA, ICASA, and FPB.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to DDG Shelembe for tackling the issues that required the shareholder ministry to respond. According to my notes, the first set of questions were clear questions were from Honorable Mackenzie, and the first one was about network performance and benchmarking. So the according to we do benchmarking according to the standards of the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, that relate to transmission networks. And the standard is from 99% to 99.999, or what is called the 5 nines. And in terms of that standard, we are sitting in the, our performance sits in the 20%, the top 20% of performance against that standard. And our direct competitor that we compare ourselves with in the South African market is OpenServe, the network infrastructure part of Telkom. And we compare favorably against OpenServe based on information that we get from BMIT, the local research house. The second question was around expenditure on training, where we are currently spending 1.8%. Our wish as BBI is to spend at least 2% of payroll on training. However, we are not there yet because of financial constraints. Then in terms of the BEE scorecard for our sector, we should be at 6%. But where we are as BBI at the moment in terms of our finances, that 6% is not yet possible. So we are aiming to at least make 2%. I think in the period post the merger with Centec, perhaps we can get to start aiming for the 6%. I think we note the comments made by Honorable Kubeka, but I didn't pick up any questions from her. The questions from you, Chair, Honorable Maneli, they have both been answered by DDG Shelembe from the department. That's all, Chair. If I missed something, I will take clarity from the members who asked if I missed anything. Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. And let me take this opportunity to, starting with the Honorable Fagu, we certainly take note of the situation that NEMISA is in at the moment in terms of, Program 3, that is really not making us happy to be where we are. It is the core of the business, and we truly acknowledge that. And we have immediately implemented measures that will address all these issues that came through that AGSA has raised. And we are moving with speed to ensure that this is not repeated in this current financial year and in the coming financial years. And we also take note that it's not acceptable at all that we should be where we are. And moving on to Honorable Mackenzie, I would like to indicate in terms of the advocacy campaigns that happened while the CFO prepares to answer on the other questions relating to finance and all that. Two examples that I can give of advocacy campaigns is that of the Freedom Walk and Economic Opportunities Expo that took place in Tabangulu in the Eastern Cape, and as well as the Eastern Cape e-learning summit that NEMISA participated in and exhibited at. So the costs mainly around those, even the others related to travel and accommodation of NEMISA people or team that was assigned to go down to the Eastern Cape to those events. So there were no direct costs from NEMISA in terms of paying for the actual costs of those events. And in terms of online training, that we need to move quickly on that. Yes, we fully agree, Honorable Mackenzie and the committee, that we need to move very quickly with that. We have started actually. NEMISA now has an LMS, a learning management system, which is mainly online. And the core labs are also moving with speed. They are already delivering a lot of learning online. And we just need to, it is that NEMISA learning management system is now going through the testing phase, and once approved by the board, it will be launched very soon. And in terms of the research reports, about more information relating to those, we have a couple of them as per the report, the annual report. And the first one looked into understanding digital skills in government and the future jobs in government, or the future of work in government. And that related to also the future skills that government employees may need or may require moving forward. And then as well, there's a report on NEMISA staff or NEMISA teams digital skills needs, taking into account that NEMISA itself needs to be empowered or needs to be ready to be able to serve the market that it is supposed to serve. And therefore, it needs to recognize that it also needs to upskill itself. And the other one that we have has to do with the uptake and mutual recognition of MOOCs in South Africa. Those are massive online learning courses in South Africa. And then the other one is on gamification for collaboration learning. And then the other one is reskilling South Africa's coal miners in the digital era. And the other one is enablers and barriers for mobile commerce and banking services among the elderly in South Africa. So those are the reports. And just moving on to the question that came from the chair relating to the research as well, to say on what has been the contribution of these reports into the national strategy. I can say that NEMISA did share the reports with the department or DCDT, and from time to time, NEMISA got invited to workshops. Even recently, just yesterday, we received an invitation to a workshop to look into now the implementation of the actual strategy. So we take it that they were taken into consideration, and that they made a contribution somehow. And in terms of the question around how does NEMISA position itself to support government and how it should be linking with the education system, especially the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Higher Education and Training, the answer to that is that certainly there are initiatives underway to do that, and in the main, those are led by DCDT, and NEMISA is working very closely with DCDT in finalizing partnerships, and discussions are underway in terms of getting NEMISA to reach out into schools, but in the form of agreeing with the DBE to even influence curriculums into schools, into basic education, and with DHET to start working closely with TVET colleges as they are regionally established in most parts of the country, and that working with them could help us to reach even more people, especially into the rural areas. So that's where we are. We see them as being very critical. We are also looking into working with the National School of Government so that we can support them in terms of the content, but also partnering with them to reach to their audiences in terms of training not only senior leaders or senior managers in government entities and in government departments, but also to the junior occupations in the government. So that's the work that is unfolding at the moment. I'll hand over to the CFO. CFO to respond to questions that relate to finance. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members. If I can maybe start with an issue, Chair, that you raised with regards to the issue of the irregular expenditure. The irregular expenditure here, we are referring to NEMISA in 2017 signed a lease agreement for the current building that NEMISA is situated. That lease agreement apparently didn't go through the normal tender process and therefore is deemed irregular. The contract runs for 5 years, which means that even though it's identified that this transgression of the procurement processes happened in 2017, each and every year we pay any rental and any rental related expenses. Those will continue to be irregular expenditure, in other words. Hence, the 9.8 million is regarded as irregular expenditure in the current year, though it's identified in the prior year. That is what it means. Therefore, it will continue up until May 2022. Unfortunately, with the compliance is that once you transgress a compliance, you don't go back and say you can be able to fix that. That will be classified as such till the end of the contract. Now, if I can move on to the other question with regards to the equipment stolen. We do have an asset register, and that asset register is part of the audit by the Auditor General. So the issue of the auditing of the asset register, when the Auditor General issues its audit report, that encompasses the audit of assets, including the asset register. And we can assure the committee that the asset register is there, it's accurate, hence we didn't have any qualification point in terms of the asset register. In terms of the equipment stolen, indeed, the way equipment that were stolen, which we have reported to the insurance, and the insurance indeed have settled the claim. And we can assure the committee that we do have now CCTV cameras, biometrics, so that we can be able to enhance our control measures with regards to issues of ensuring that we can avoid measures relating to the issues of the theft of assets. With regards to the issue of the SIU investigation, we currently don't have any SIU investigation that is currently happening. Issues of the disciplinary cases, the last disciplinary cases, Honorable Mackenzie, was with regards to, I think there were tenders in financial year 17-18 with regards to some of the conference that occurred in Mpumalanga, which resulted in irregular expenditure. Those disciplinary did occur in 18-19. Eventually, the then procurement manager was dismissed with regards to those matters. But in 19-20, we did not have any disciplinary cases. Chair, I will also move to another case of litigation. I'm not so sure. I thought the question, I think, was raised under NEMISA. Under NEMISA, we don't have litigation currently, neither are we paying any legal fees for any matters against or for NEMISA. So unless if maybe I've misunderstood that question, maybe through you, I'll get more guidance so that I can attend to that. And then with regards to the issues that we also spoke about, that I would also like to touch on, Chairperson, is that for us as NEMISA, we also recognize the fact that capacity is very important in terms of moving forward. Hence, we did highlight the issues of the risk compliance, the issue of the procurement manager, to say that for us to be able to move and be able to resolve the issues of audit report of ACM, even though we didn't have much of the capacity, we are saying that with the appointment of the risk and compliance managers and the procurement managers, we quite believe that this will go a long way, so that now we ensure that any other remaining minor issues that are still there in terms of the irregular expenditure are even resolved. And also, if I can try to check, I think the other part, the CEO has already covered the issues of the research, has already covered the issues of the issues of awareness. I think maybe there might be any other question that I might have missed out, Chair, through your guidance, I'll be able to attend to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. ICASA.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson and honorable members. So we will try to deal with a number of questions made. There's also a common theme across the questions. But I think let me just first and foremost deal with the issue of the licensing of spectrum. Now, on the 30th of September this year, the authority issued invitations to apply for both the wireless open access network spectrum as well as the high demand spectrum, which will be licensed through an auction. The auction is intended to take place during the last week of March in 2021. And as matters stand, we do not see anything that suggests we won't be able to meet that date. So just to try and allay concerns that perhaps we may not be able to, as matters stand, we are working around the clock to make sure that we meet that date. The closing date for the applications on the wireless open access network side is at the end of March. So because the one will be licensed through a different process, the closing date for applications is at the end of March 2021, but at that time, the auction will be taking place. So that's the input in as far as it relates to the issue of the high demand spectrum. Now, there is an issue around the must carry obligations. How far are we on must carry? I think it came from Honorable Kubeka. At the end of this current financial year, we would have achieved draft regulations. The draft regulations will be out, and those draft regulations will be informed by the findings document. So we are also on track in that regard, and we will achieve the draft regulations by the end of the current financial year. There was a question on the spot, the national spot review. It came from Honorable Faku. The authority earlier this week published a notice containing the draft sports broadcasting regulations. We have seen date is the 15th of December 2020. So we couldn't meet our target in the previous financial year because, amongst other reasons, the Act obliges us to consult the Minister of Sport as well as the Minister of Communication when we make regulations or amendments in this regard. Those consultations took place, but at the time when the financial year ended, we were still, in engagement with both ministers because they needed clarity. There were follow-up meetings and so forth, and it's one of those examples I made, honorable members, that much as also contained in the APP, we cannot risk as a regulator to just, expedite things to a point where we become unprocedural, just chasing the APP target. We try to minimize these kind of situations, but where they occur, we unfortunately need to follow the spirit of the Act over and above what is contained in our APP targets. It doesn't happen often, but there are instances where it happens and it becomes somewhat beyond our control. There was an input by Honorable Mackenzie. He started, of course, by giving us well wishes, which I would like to accept on behalf of the members of council. And indeed, we took an oath to regulate the sector in the public interest. And that's the oath we will uphold at all times. Thanks for those comments. You asked about the broadband market review. Where are we? When will our process complete? Last week, we held public hearings in this particular respect. And at the end of the financial year, we should be able to finalize this particular process. Now, the relationship between ourselves and the Competition Commission is more complementary, because the Competition Commission is also participating in submissions. They participated in public hearings and so forth. So it's more of a collaborative relationship. We do have a memorandum of understanding which was signed sometime last year, and it's issues of concurrent jurisdiction, and we do respect each other's space, but where there is scope for participation, we made inputs, in their process. They are making inputs on our process, and we hope that by the end of this financial year, we would have made some significant input in this particular regard. Now, there's an issue around consequence management. I think I would like to contextualize this issue around consequence management, because so it is not as if there has not been any consequence management at all. All the AG is saying, even in the AG management letter, is, there's an acknowledgement in the actual AG's letter. There's an acknowledgement that there has been some disciplinary steps in the form, to fulfill consequence management taken. But now there's a request that we should also, be mindful of revisiting the previous years. And I think in the question of consequence management, it's also important to highlight that that aspect is, from is governed by another piece of legislation, which is the Labor Relations Act. So even in the process of fulfilling consequence management, we need to be consistent with the guiding, Labor Relations Act. It has to be followed accordingly. We cannot, be taking a posture of a preconceived outcomes and so forth. So in the previous financial year, honorable members would recall that there were certain incidents and matters which were brought to their attention, where the authority was indeed, taking disciplinary steps, in as far as certain officials are concerned, and those processes have been concluded. So I think, in a nutshell, that would be the issue around.
iPhone, I don't know who's that. Is the mute the mic with your mic, or I see myself as to move.
All right, thanks. All right, thanks. Yes, and just a quick one on what we have also done to improve our compliance environment. I mean, members of the executive management, senior managers, supply chain staff, and even certain members of council underwent supply chain management training over the previous period. There's a compulsory KPA implemented in the performance contracts of all divisional heads, as well as officials assuming a role in the processing of payments, so that at least we all carry the responsibility within the organization in as far as supply chain matters are concerned. Now, there was an issue, the last question that I will deal with before the CEO comes to handle others, is the issue of moratorium, I think, on vacancies and so forth. It will be the last one. So time and again, we receive notices, from the department, about cost containment, the importance to really, stretch the rent. We do so, and as the CEO has noted, every time a vacancy occurs, we pause, we look whether we really need to fill that vacancy, or is there a way we can reconfigure our existing human capital to fulfill the requirements of that vacancy. In certain instances, we have no option but to go and fill that vacancy. In certain instances, we have been able to just reconfigure our approach. So we, of course, are mindful that in us not filling certain vacancies, we should not hamper our service delivery objective. So it's a very delicate balancing act. We are really cost constrained, and this leads to the next question around honorable members would recall that there is a clarion call on the side of ICASA that we would really need to review our funding model. We collect license fees, annual fees. All we can do, as the CFO had touched or alluded on, is to keep it for a period of about 30 days and generate some interest, but within that period, we would then have to send the money to the National Revenue Fund. So we are cost constrained. Our mandate is ever expanding, and our budget allocations, have been materially on the decline over the past few years. I would like to give over to the CEO to quickly deal with the question of SITA and computer rentals, and the CFO can just deal with the issue around the grant. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps before I deal with the question of consumer rentals, I think there is a question that Honorable Mackenzie raised around the process. And I think it was in the context of the policy direction, and the question specifically was whether or not ICASA invites comments, then issues the ITA. Is there no room for further comments? Honorable Mackenzie, perhaps just to sum up the process, the Minister has the exclusive preserve in terms of policy making. So the Minister would issue a draft policy direction, invite comments on the draft policy direction. Once the consideration of comments is complete, Minister would then issue a final policy direction. When the final policy direction is issued, ICASA then considers the policy, and then ICASA would then have to act upon consideration of that policy. Perhaps a key distinction to draw in this regard, Honorable Mackenzie, is that in terms of the ECA, there is a prescribed process for regulation making, and there is a prescribed process for licensing. In terms of a regulation making process, the authority is duty bound to go through a draft and a consultative process. However, when it comes to licensing, the law requires that an ITA be issued. What the authority did with the issuing of the information memorandum and the consultation in that regard, I think was informed by, firstly, the significance of the process and the need, I guess, to take on board all the inputs that could potentially be raised. So it was a rather unique consultative window that the authority created, which is why it was not even a draft ITA, because from an ECA perspective, there is no requirement for a draft ITA to be issued. I hope that clarifies that issue on the process and whether or not there should have been a further room for consultations. On the question around whether or not we take advantage of the transverse, I think the response, Chair, is that we do, and it's not just specifically for SITA. So every year, as we go through a planning process, and we compile the annual procurement plan and we collate the procurement needs of the organization, we then assess, again, based on the need for us to optimize our resources, we then assess areas where it would make sense based on the regulatory permissions to go through the transversal contracts. And there are instances where we would go through the SITA transversal contracts, and there are instances where we would go through the transversal contracts that Treasury has made provision for. Thank you, Chair. I'll pause here and allow the CFO to deal with the other questions.
Thank you, CEO. Thank you, Chair. Let me switch on my video, Chair. Chair, to respond to the question that you raised, and also linking it to the issue or the question that was raised by Honorable Mackenzie. The going concern conclusion, Chair, is purely based on the fact that on annual basis we receive our allocation from the department, and it is on the same basis where we say we can solely rely on the allocation that is being allocated to ICASA on annual basis. And as at the reporting date, we never had any indication that our allocation for the next financial year will be reduced. Hence, we indicated the 477 million to say that is what it was actually allocated. And so far, we have no indication from the department that says no, that allocation will be reduced. So that is why we are saying we solely rely on the allocation from the from National Treasury through the department. So going concern is purely dependent on the allocation. Linking it to the issue raised by Honorable Mackenzie to say, are there any other revenue streams that ICASA is generating revenue from? Honorable Mackenzie, on this one, as I indicated, we don't have any other revenue stream except the allocation received from National Treasury. So what we also try and generate income from is those investments that we actually, the fees that we collect and invest for a period of 30 days. The money that we collect on average is 1.3 billion on annual basis. And that money we don't normally keep, we don't actually keep, it goes direct into the National Revenue Fund. So we don't get to keep a percentage of that. Hence, there's a need of us actually to reconsider the funding model of ICASA, which is what the chairperson was talking to. Honorable Kubeka, you raised an issue on ICASA being encouraged to correct the issues raised by the AG. Yes, Chair, to indicate progress, we have started engaging and resolving the issues raised by the AG. Some of the recommendations were implemented with immediate effect before even the AG report was issued, just to make sure that we close the gap as soon as possible on the issues raised. Where there were issues raised on the contracts management, the legacy contracts or evergreen contracts, as the AG indicated, we have engaged the relevant service providers to remedy those contracts, and we are actually progressing in terms of resolving those issues with an objective of resolving those issues before the next financial year and close the gaps that were actually identified. Chair, I think I have actually responded to the questions relating to the funding and the ACM issues, Chair.
FPB.
Yes, Chair. I will respond to the questions. Just to first communicate an apology from the chairperson of the FPB Council. I think we omitted to indicate, but she was a victim of armed robbery yesterday, and all her gadgets were taken, so she was unable to join this meeting. But she, on behalf of the council, has also requested us to convey to the committee that this, in essence, will probably be their last meeting where they appear before the committee, as their term ends in November. I just thought I should start with that before I respond to all the questions. And then starting with the question on the regression, I think as the FPB team, we take the concern that's been raised, and we've already had a deep dive into our operations and control environment to try and get to the root cause of some of the issues that have been raised by the Auditor General. And we have an action plan that we've put in place to ensure that we consistently work towards strengthening our control environment and ensure that we do not have a repeat and we go back to the clean audit status at the end of the current financial year. In response to Honorable Faku's question on child protection, the turnaround times, it depends on the volumes of the cases that we receive. You see there that we received 15 cases in the year under review. We have a target of ensuring that we respond to subs, acknowledge and say that we are working on the case within an 8-day environment, and we indicate to them how long it will take for us to analyze all the material. In most cases, you will find one case contains about 20,000 or 30,000 images that our child protection officers need to look at and analyze on an individual basis so that they can compile the affidavit that will serve in court. So it all depends on the volume of the content that is provided to us 2 months, depending on the volume. And then in terms of Honorable Mackenzie's question on the Illuminati, we choose not to steer away from conspiracy theories. And for us, that symbol is actually a symbol that talks to the power of artificial intelligence and the ability for it to integrate human feeling into technology, which is an important component of what we are doing. And we want to integrate artificial intelligence more and more in how we regulate content online and most the online platforms. And on the question on us wanting to censor the internet, first and foremost, I think in a democratic dispensation, it would be impossible for us to censor or restrict speech beyond what is provided for in the Constitution, especially in Section 16 of the Constitution. So as the FPB, we operate within that framework. Even the Film and Publications Amendment Act and the regulations, the draft regulations that are there, they operate within the framework. What we have seen a great deal of in the media is somehow a misunderstanding of what the legislation seeks to do, a misunderstanding of what the legislation seeks to address in terms of the mandate of the FPB. And I can assure you, the legislation as it was passed by this committee makes no provision to censor user-generated content by the FPB. There is no requirement for social media platforms to register with the FPB. There's no requirement for social media platforms to ensure that they submit material to the FPB. Our preoccupation as the FPB in that regard is largely for streaming service providers that are in the business forms, where the legislation does make provision for us to interfere or to take steps as the FPB is only with respect to revenge pornography, nothing else and nothing more. So the legislation says if there is revenge pornography that is brought to our attention, then we have a responsibility as the FPB to ensure that it is taken down, and whoever may have posted it, then there are consequence management and actions that are taken against that individual. And then in terms of Honorable Kubega's question, I think CFO, you'll assist me on the BBBE question if there's a need for you to respond. On the staff relations, definitely I agree with you. It is always our intention to try and resolve all matters before they get to the CCMA. And I think some of them, it is unavoidable for you to go to CCMA or even to take them on review if you believe that the ruling sets a precedent that can have negative consequences for the institution. We have settled in some matters. We have actually averted some matters from going out, but the one matter that you make reference to, we had to take the route that we took because we felt that the ruling overlooked the policies of the organization. It overlooked the steps that the institution had taken in dealing with this particular employee. We just wanted confirmation and concurrence from the Labour Court on the matter. Chairperson, your questions on the reduction in submissions. I think the 5-year strategy that we've just concluded now had the foresight to say that online regulation is the future, online distribution is the future of content distribution in all markets, which is why some 5 years ago, we started the process of reviewing our legislation, because as a regulatory body, all actions that we take need to be informed by the law as well as regulatory prescripts. So we have been consistently working to ensure that once the online market booms in South Africa, we are ready as the FPB to regulate it. So I can say without fear that we have reviewed our legislation. We are putting in place regulations that will be enable us to effectively regulate the online market. We have entered into online licensing agreements with some of the big players in the South African market and internationally, where we are actually entering into co-regulatory agreements with them, and we are training them on the classification system for the South African market, so that when content is streamed into South Africa, of the South African values and norms. And we have even introduced a new tariff model, because every time there has been a cry about the tariffs of FPB being a barrier for entry, we took that into cognizance. We reviewed our tariff model. The minister published and gazetted our new tariff model a month ago, where we have a cascading fee scale depending on your size of your online portal as a streaming platform. So we have been consistently working on those, and even our environment, in our operating environment. We have reviewed our business model. We have reviewed our structure as well, to ensure that we can respond to the requirements and the needs of the online streaming market. So our strategy, it didn't start, it hasn't started now. We started looking into this as early as 5 years ago. And then on the irregular expenditure, Chair, I think you were asking about our use of SITA as a service provider. The items that were listed are actually historical items. In the last cognizant decisions and actions to actually engage SITA in a number of projects as the FPB. So in the year under review, actually, SITA assisted us with our architecture program, our database consolidation, and also our application that we are currently developing. So as the board, we do make use of SITA services when SITA is able to provide those services to us. CFO, I don't know if you want to respond to the issue on the BBBE matter. I didn't note it properly, but you can respond. On the skills audit, I think Honorable Kubeka was commending our performance, so there's no need to respond. Thank you, Chair. Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you, Abu and Chair. Yes, I had a connection problem when on the BBBE. I heard the support for our achievements of 47% to the specific identified groups. But if there is anything further on BBBE, I'm more than happy to engage with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable members, may I just check before we move towards the summing up the meeting? May I just check if there are members who would want to follow up, just to clarify maybe a question that they think would have not been understood. In the absence of that, we would try and wrap up the meeting. May I just check?
Honorable Mackenzie, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Mackenzie, is your hand up, Honorable Faku?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Faku and Honorable Mackenzie. In that order, you can then follow up just to clarify your question.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. You can see I have my cup. Thank you very much, Ms. Mashele, for the answer, very comprehensive answers you gave, and I think the FPB is in very good hands. Your demeanour certainly suggests that. Ma'am, just an additional question that occurred to me while I was listening to you. I would imagine your content viewers or classifiers are, I mean, I couldn't even begin to imagine when you talk about those images, the images they must see. And thank goodness I don't, because I think to any person with a heart, some of these things are absolutely horrendous. How do you and your classifiers and your organization, do you have a program in place to deal with the psychological effects that you and your team must suffer? You must suffer when you view this material. I mean, yes. So that's my question, Chairperson. Can you just tell me what sort of wellness programs or welfare programs you have in place for your staff? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mackenzie. Honorable Faku. Honorable Faku.
Thank you, Chair. Just a correction. I wanted to say not NEMISA, FPP. I think they've explained it. The CEO has explained it. But Chair, I don't know if this point, maybe I forgot to raise it. The legal cases with ICASA, can ICASA just explain to us how much they have spent against the CFO? I know there's that ongoing case. I think I did mention it. And how many cases against their employees they have won and lost? Because the reason that I'm asking this, Chair, is because we need to be consistent. We have, ICASA knows that I have an issue with high legal costs. It's something that I always raise. I think we need to be consistent with all the entities to make sure that our legal costs does not go more than it's supposed to go. I just need that clarity from ICASA, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Faku. We'll start with ICASA and then get FPB in that order.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So on the question around legal costs, I think there is a slide on our presentation that talks to the number of matters we have had in the previous financial year and how there have been improvements from a reduction. I think there was a slide there under human resources, which we can check. But secondly, there is a principle which we have shared with the committee before, and it's a principle which perhaps also account for the reduction of those matters. And that principle is around, engage as you litigate. We have really adopted a position where before we go to court with operators, with anyone, we thoroughly assess whether there is a need, whether there is any other way we can resolve the matter without going to the courts. So I think that's just a principle I would like to put forth. But in as far as the actual numbers are concerned, if the chair so allows, we can make a submission to that effect, just by way of a letter to explain how much we have spent on all labor relations related matters or on litigation in the entire financial year. I think just so that we give the portfolio committee a proper comprehensive response with exact figures, if the chair so allows. But there has been a reduction. I don't know if there is a need to go back to that slide without taking much time. If the chair also allows, we can just go to a slide that shows that reduction I'm referring to in terms of our labor relations cases. In the previous financial year, we never had a labor court matter. We did not, there is that particular slide, so should the chair wish, yeah.
No, thanks, Chair. I think your response on comprehensive report that talks to figures and so on would be something to look at. But I think you are also saying you will also give us a sense on how that principle that you've applied, which has given you the zeros you have, because it shouldn't be like there are zeros on the basis that there was nothing that happened. But if that it is as a result of that principle, it's helpful. And remember, for us as the committee chair, it's not just about ICASA, but it's about other entities also learning from pockets of excellence in different entities that report to the committee. So I think we should it should suffice to have it in writing, and that it will be shared with members. So we don't need to bring back the presentation in that score. FPB.
Thank you, Chair. I think an easy answer to that question by Honorable Mackenzie is yes. I think it's an international standard that people who are content moderators do need regular debriefing. So as the FPB for the last couple of years, we have made debriefings a compulsory requirement for all people who do content moderating of any kind, be it the classifiers as well as our child protection officers who actually review the sexual abuse material. It's a quarterly requirement. Every quarter, all of them, they need to go for debriefing with a registered psychologist through our wellness service provider. They have also access to the wellness service provider on hand if there is material that they have reviewed on any particular day and they need to get individual debriefing at that time. We are members of InHope, which is an international association for hotlines, which is an European Union based association, where as an InHope requirement, you actually need to ensure that your online monitors, they do have access to debriefing, a debriefing room where they can play games and do anything that will help them to forget and get away from their work environment at any given time, should they need to do so. But that's only for them and not for the rest of us. Thank you, Chair.
And thanks to ICASA for the responses and the FPB on the follow-up questions. I think, honorable members, you'd agree that for entities, there will never be enough time to engage, but we should really appreciate that qualitatively we have been able to engage in the short space of time we have, and that these engagements would continue as we do our oversight over the entities. I think the point really is that overarchingly, the committee appreciates that the entities that came before the committee, you have unqualified audit opinions that have been given by the Auditor General, and that the committee indeed impresses on all the entities to ensure that they address the matters that have been raised. More importantly, that we ensure that there's no reoccurrence in a way that helps us to get all the entities that report to the department, of course, oversight played by the committee, that we can get to a point of clean audits, as well as balancing clean audits delivery in terms of the targets that get set. I think that's what it's really the message we should be able to give to the entities, that is overarchingly so. But BBI, I think there is an understanding there that there's appreciation in terms of work that's being done, but the committee would still want to impress on the department to work closely with the Department of Trade and Competition to get at least the response from the minister in a way that addresses this going concern issue raised by BBI. That in a way will indeed make a serious contribution in getting BBI to extend its infrastructure deployment in the areas that need to be connected and so on. It's important this because we are meeting at a time when the committee has already received a report on broadband, which was done by the department as well as ICASA attending the same. And there's been appreciation of BBI coming into the space and SITA to also help move on this. But this hinges on whether this gets to be a success or not. And I would want to direct that the committee would really want to get feedback before we really rise. When we get to the next year, as we'll be getting into the last quarter of the financial year, we have a sense that we are turning the corner on that side, and if things are not to be, what will then be strategies to be employed to get BBM to be functional? That's cool. We do also appreciate and would have to keep that the department has indicated that the business case, as it was targeted to be on the 1st of October, it's reported to the committee that that has now been settled, and it will be an issue of legislation that goes with that. We take it that in the interim, whilst would be waiting for legislation, that indeed some memorandum of understanding and or cooperation agreements will still continue to be there so that we deliver to our people. So I think that's an important point there. With regard to NEMISA, I'm sure they would have heard this point. I've covered the overarching issues there, but I think what the committee really says is that at least on the work that is your core business, we should not find reasons why targets could not be met just on the basis of using your tools to record the work that you have done. I think you should understand our concerns above, that you would not be able to have these targets recorded as such, but from a point of finances, it means that it can get to that point. It's irregular or wasteful because there is a cost attached to the training of an individual. So we will just have to make sure that that is lifted up. We'll continue to monitor that aspect as the committee. In ICASA, I'm sure the new council with the new chair, you would have heard what the committee said. If there's anything to really measure at this point, it is the spectrum, that we really make sure that the dates that have been set are indeed not changed. It's important for credibility, but also for confidence on those that are looking at this spectrum release in order to invest in the economy. But more importantly, it is a direct contribution to the call of the president on the reconstruction and recovery plan for the economy of the country. I think that's what is emphasized by almost all members. But of course, we should impress on the department to work with ICASA, that at no point, especially as it relates to grant, that it leads to a situation where the going concern of ICASA is under question. Whilst, of course, there should be efforts made to ensure that ICASA looks probably at other revenue sources. But in the meantime, we just have to ensure that that gets to be allocated as grant is at least secured in a way that does not compromise its going concern. In that way, the confidence on the regulator would still problems. There's a lot at stake. I think that's the message we should bring forward. Of course, with the F raised, of course, of addressing the AG-related matters. But I think what also comes out now, which is a point you would have raised right at the end, CEO, about the term of the board that ends. Would also want to impress on the department, because surely they've been aware that will reach this point, that everything else is done to ensure that the governance is not compromised. In the presentation itself, this change of leadership in some of the entities, it shows that it does hit hard, especially in the course of the financial year. So that everything is done to ensure that we can stabilize in that regard. Of course, the committee would really welcome a workshop like on the regulatory roadmap, which the FPB has referred to, and also taking interest in helping the committee to get deeper into that discussion. And I take it that it will also be an opportunity for you to unpack the strategies that you also referred to in dealing with the content exhibitors on streaming and so on, so that the committee is, I think, comfortable. That we also need to take into account that you've raised the issue of critical vacancies, surely with resources allowing, and that the moratorium issue would have been dealt with. I think the committee would still impress on you and the department working closer to minimize the impact of the uncertainty brought about by transition, as people would look at measures and so on, that doesn't lead to a situation where your capacity is depleted to a point of not being able to do what you are supposed to do, which is an important work of protecting citizens from content that may not be desirable in particular. So that is really the summary, honorable members, for our meeting, which then helps us to craft resolutions as we are dealing with the BTRR. That is it, honorable members, which takes us to officially adjournment of the meeting. So the meeting stays adjourned. Thank you until we meet again when we deal with other matters. Maybe I will use this opportunity now just for members in particular to indicate that we will be sending something that reviews the program. The date of the 11th is also a date for by-elections of the country. We're already working on the backside with the Secretariat that we review at that date. I didn't think that it needed so much of consultation or approval. I must apologize. But I'm sharing also knowing that we are also political animals and we are directly affected by what happens. Others are voters in those wards. We can't keep them in meetings. So we are targeting the 18th, but as I said, honorable members will communicate officially, but the 11th is affected. So you can just plan differently. No, I can see that's approval.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
All right. So thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Mackenzie, you can just pass the cup. It's a weekend.